السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، أما بعد. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات كانت لهم جنات الفردوس نزلا خالدين فيها لا يبغون عنها حولا. صدق الله العظيم. Normally, we would be having the halaqah on Adab al-Mufrad, the book of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, but today we'll do a little different, and I thought we would talk about our Shaykh, our Hadhrat, Hazrat Dr. Mohammed Ismail Memon Madani Rahmatullahi, Alayh. Some lessons that we can learn from his life, from his childhood till after he grew up and till he passed away, different lessons, different situations he went through in his life. Hopefully we can go through some of those and we can see what type of person he was, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had accepted him, and what type of service of deen Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took from him. Very briefly going over his life, Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh was born in India in a small town known as Mangrol, which is in Gujarat. After he was in Mangrol in Gujarat, he spent his early childhood there, about 13 years of his life. His father was a very wealthy businessman and a very respected person in Mangrol, and at the same time he was very religious. And Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayhi himself, he mentions that my father was very strict on us children, on the sons especially, on their salah, and he was very strict on the sons performing the salah with jama'ah in the masjid. And he says that my father, after salah, he would look around and make sure all of my sons are in the masjid for jama'ah. And if anyone was absent, he would question him, and if he did not have a reasonable excuse, he would be punished for not attending the jama'ah in the masjid. So from the early childhood, his father brought the children up in an Islamic environment. His father was bi'ah to a scholar by the name of Maulana Niyar Ahmed. Maulana Niyar Ahmed was a sheikh of Hazrat's father. And who was Maulana Niyar Ahmed? He was the Khalifa of Maulana Rashid Ahmed Gangohi rahimahullah. Haji Imdadullah rahimahullah. Haji Imdadullah rahimahullah was the sheikh of all the shuyukh. Our silsila goes to Haji Imdadullah rahimahullah. So Hazrat's father was bi'ah to Maulana Niyar Ahmed, who was the Khalifa of Haji Imdadullah rahimahullah. So Hazrat's father was very religious, and he was firm into his deen, onto his salah, onto his adhkar and his du'as and tasbihat. And he made sure that his children were strict on their deen also. Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, he spent his early childhood in Mangrol, and he would spend most of his time in the masjid. Even though he was a small child, he was 7, 8 years old, 9 years old. At that age, when we are not even taken to the masjid for jama'ah yet, at that age, Hazrat was frequent to the masajid, and he was attached with the imam of the masjid. And Hazrat himself mentions that I used to spend most of the time in the masjid. What would I do? I would clean the masjid, broom the masjid, bring water from the well and bring it to the masjid for the people to make wudu. And I would just be at the service of the masjid, spend most of the time in the masjid. This is a small child at this time, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put this thing in his heart from that early age that he was attached to the masjid and to the service of the deen and for the musallis of the masjid. Anyways, Hazrat, he spent his early education, he did his early education in Mangrol. And like I said earlier, around the age of 13, 14, in the year 1950, around 1950, he moved from India to Pakistan, Karachi, where he continued his studies. He was enrolled in the college and then to university. In 1954, when Hazrat was about 19 years old, when he was enrolled in the college in Karachi, he says that the classmates and the fellow students, they were heavily influenced by Jamaat Islami and the Maududi movement. And he says that those students, they got me into Jamaat Islami and they started bringing me the books about Maududi. And he said that I was so attached with Maududiism that day and night I would read their books. He says for 2 years, I was so attached with Jamaat Islami, with Maududi, that I read almost all of their books. He says finally after 2 years, when I would read their books and I would see their scholars, I would see a difference. And he says, this is where I realized that there's something not right here. He says that their books were talking very high about the deen, about the ibadah, but in their life, they were not even doing their salah, they were not attached with the du'as, and they were not practically following the deen. So he says that I realized that this Maududiism, it's only limited to the books, and nothing is practical in them. So then he started to do more research, and then he finally realized that this was not Jama'ah that was on haqq, and he realized that there was something that was not correct in this sect of Maududiism. Anyways, this was in 1954. 1956, 2 years later, when Hazrat is about 21 years of age, when he was still in his studies, he says that after one of the exams, he had some holidays, some vacation. So he planned to travel to different places, to historical sites. So he says from Pakistan, he went to India to visit some sites, historical places. So he said from Karachi, he went to Bombay, then he went to Agra, where there's Taj Mahal, and different places he went to. He says during that trip, during that travel, someone he met, and that person told Hazrat that as you're traveling to different places, why don't you also visit Saharanpur? And in Saharanpur, there is a Wali of Allah, there is a great saint, there's a great scholar by the name of Maulana Zakariya, Rahmatullahi Alayh. Why don't you visit him? So Hazrat agreed, and he went to Saharanpur. This is in 1956, when he's about around 21 years of age. He's still a college student. So he went to Saharanpur, and Hazrat mentions that this was while I was still in my college dress. I would not even have a topi by this time. And my dress was a normal tie suit, pant shirts, and I was not into the deen at this time. So he says I was a normal college student, and while my travel, I went to Saharanpur and I met Maulana Zakariya. I went to Maulana Zakariya Rahmatullahi's house. So this is the first time Hazrat is meeting Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahimullah at the age of around 21. When he reached Saharanpur, he asked people where Hazrat Shaykh Rahimullah's house was, and someone guided him, and he finally got to the house of Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh. When he got there, he says that this was around 12 at noon, afternoon time. And it was a time when the classes were off and it was a break time. So Hazrat Shaykh, he had left the madrasa and he went to his home to rest and for lunch, and it was a break time. So he said I went straight to Hazrat Shaykh's house, and when I went there, Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh was alone in his house at that time. So he said that he had let me in, he allowed me to come in. After I got in, he asked me where I'm from, And after a little conversation, we sat together, and Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh, he brought some food and he fed me some food. And he says that after I ate the food, Hazrat Shaykh the whole time was sitting with Hazrat, alone. They both are alone, the first meeting with Hazrat Shaykh. So they're both sitting alone. After lunch, Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh called someone and said that take Hazrat Dr. Ismail and take him to the guest room and let him have some rest. Zuhr was at 3 o'clock. So this was a little nap time. At 3 o'clock, everyone would get together for Zuhr. And so after Zuhr, Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh told someone to show Hazrat the madrasa. So Hazrat had a tour of Mazahir al-Ulum, Saharanpur, the madrasa. And he says, Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, he mentions that while I was having a tour, I was shown different places. We passed by a room where Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh was teaching his lesson. So he says, when I saw this, I sat down in that dars. So at that, Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, he had an opportunity to sit in the lesson of Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh in Saharanpur. So he sat in the dars, and the dars went on from after Dhuhr till Asr. He says after Asr, they prayed Asr Salah together. After Asr, Hazrat went with Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh back to Hazrat Shaykh's house, and they had tea together. After they had tea together, Hazrat, he asked permission from Hazrat Shaykh to leave, and Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh, he said that you just came, this is very short, you have to stay more. And Hazrat says that I gave him an excuse that I'm in a journey, I was just passing by, I'll come next time, and this is how Hazrat Shaykh let him go. And amazingly, we find this even today in the family of Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh in Saharanpur. I remember a few years ago when I went to Saharanpur with my family, and our plan was very similar, that we went for a few hours to meet the mashayikh, to meet the family of Hazrat Shaykh, and then to return back. So a few hours later, I think we got there around Asr. After Isha, we were planning to depart. And when we told them that we were heading back, and they were upset that you just came and you're planning to leave right now. No, you cannot leave. And they forced us to stay, and we spent that night there. And we did not have a choice, and we spent the night. And even though we had a hotel booked somewhere else, because we did not want to trouble them, and so we thought, at nighttime we'll leave. And we had a room reserved, a hotel booked. And that hotel room, we did not get the refund, but alhamdulillah, we got something better. We got to stay in Hazrat Shaykh Rahimullah's family's homes. And we spent the night there. Next morning, again, they would not let us leave. I think it was next day around Asr Maghrib was when we finally were able to leave. But this is Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh and his family, very much generous and welcoming to the guest. When a guest would arrive, they would try their best to keep them and not let them go back. And unfortunately, we don't find this nowadays. A guest would come and we are looking for when he leaves. Let's feed him quickly, and let's see when he's departing, so we can have our own time. But there was Hazrat Shaykh Rahimullah and his family. They were looking for guests, and when they would get a hold of a guest, they would make sure that they would hold them as long as they can and not let that guest go. So anyways, Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, he visited Hazrat Shaykh Rahimullah Alayh at that time. This was the first time he ever met Hazrat Shaykh. And Hazrat Rahmatullahi, he mentions that after returning back from this trip, and when he returned back to Pakistan, Karachi, he says that my life had changed. Just by this visit of Hazrat Shaykh and doing a ziyarah of Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh, he said my life changed. He says, now I started to love the deen, I started attaching myself to the masjid even more, I'll spend more time in the service of deen, and this is where Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, he started going in jama'ah, in tabligh from this time. And he says that I spent many 40 days for many chillas, many 3 days, and every Friday night, every Thursday night, the Shab Jummah, he would spend in the markaz and in the masjid and listening to bayans. And then he started getting more attached with the deen. And he says this was the barakah of the visit he did with Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh. And next year, in 1957, there was an ijtima in Raiwind in Pakistan. Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, he went to that ijtima in 1957 to Raiwind, and after the ijtima was completed, nearby was another sheikh, was another scholar by the name of Maulana Abdul Qadir Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh. So Hazrat visited Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh, did salam musafaha and requested du'as, and he left. Just he knew that there were some scholars, so he went to visit and he left. After returning back, Hazrat mentioned to Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh through a letter that I have a vacation coming soon, where should I spend my vacation days? And Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh replied that go to Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh and spend your vacation in his service, in his khidmah. So Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, then he spent his vacation in 1957 with Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh. And then after returning back, Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh wrote another letter to Hazrat that any time you have free days, you have holidays, you have free days, spend those days with Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh. So Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh then, for the third time, now he visits Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh. And this time, he also requests Hazrat Raipuri to get it for bi'ah too. And Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh, he accepts him, and he does bi'ah, Hazrat does bi'ah with Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh in 1957. So this was Hazrat's first sheikh, Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh. He kept his connection with Hazrat Raipuri as well as Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh. In 1959, when Hazrat was about the age of 24, 25, he got married in Karachi. Hazrat, he had total of 9 children. Many of us only know 6. 3 of them had passed away in the childhood, in the early ages. In fact, one of the sons that passed away in the early childhood, he is buried in Jannatul Baqi' in Medina Munawwara. A few years later, in 1962, Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh, the first sheikh of Hazrat, he passed away. So now, Hazrat was looking for another sheikh who he should turn to and who he should get bay'ah to. So a few years later, in 1964, by this time Hazrat had already moved to Saudi Arabia, and he was living in Medina Munawwara. In 1964, while he was in Medina Munawwara, Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh, with other akabir, other scholars, came for Hajj in that year, 1964. And in that visit, Hazrat approached Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh that I want to get bay'ah with you. Initially, Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh refused that Hazrat Raipuri Rahmatullahi Alayh is a very great scholar. Whoever is bay'ah with him, I don't feel right giving bay'ah to that person. So you already bay'ah with Hazrat Raipuri. I feel ashamed. I don't feel right that I can accept you in bay'ah. But Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh, later on, after Hazrat kept insisting, did not do the bay'ah, but he said that I will keep the connection of Shaykh with you. If you have any questions, if you need any help regarding your islah, you can stay in touch with me. So in this way, Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh accepted Hazrat as his murid, and Hazrat became his sheikh. Hazrat Shaykh became the sheikh of Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh. After he was bay'ah to Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh, Hazrat mentions that now his heart changed even more towards the deen, and the love of dunya, the attachment of dunya totally came out of his heart. He says that to the extent that because he was a doctor and he was practicing, he was working and he was earning, but he says that I was not enjoying my job, I was not into it, I did not feel like doing any work. So he says that I would just do a few hours of work, and then the rest of the day I would just spend in the masjid or with Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh. I would just work enough that I would be able to survive, feed the family, and that's it. Just enough for zarura, for necessary. And then he says that this feeling started growing more and more, love of akhirah, and then hatred towards dunya started growing more and more, that finally a time, Hazrat mentions that a time came that I totally left my job. I stopped practicing, I stopped doing the job, and no more working. 24/7, just spending time with Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh, or in the masjid doing dhikr, doing nawafil and tahajjud and those things. He says for 3.5 years, 3.5 years, not 3.5 weeks or 3.5 months, 3.5 years continuously, he spent in the service of Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh and did not do job at that time. Though he was certified doctor, he had his own clinic, but he did not do any work. He left his job and he only spent 3.5 years continuously in the service of his Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh. And this is where Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh gave a lot of attention to Hazrat, because he was there 24/7. So Hazrat benefited a lot from Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh in that period. A few years later, in 1967, while Hazrat was in Medina Munawwara, Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh used to spend his Ramadan in Saharanpur, India. So during Ramadan, he would go to, Hazrat Shaykh was also living in Medina, but he would go to Saharanpur and for Ramadans only, so that others can come and benefit. They would have an i'tikaf system, they would have the islah and the dhikr majalis. So Hazrat, he was in Medina Munawwara. Sufi Iqbal Rahmatullahi Alayh, who was a very close friend of Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, Sufi Iqbal, he was going to Saharanpur for Ramadan, and he asked Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh too, that why don't you come along, we both will go together to Hazrat Shaykh to spend our Ramadan in Saharanpur. So Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh initially, or in fact there was the other one, Hazrat convinced Sufi Iqbal that we both should go together. And Sufi Iqbal Rahmatullahi Alayh, he said that how can we leave the Ramadan of Medina? How can we leave Medina and go spend our Ramadan in India? But Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, he convinced Sufi Iqbal Sahib that no, we need to spend time with Hazrat Shaykh, and finally they both went. In 1967, this was the first Ramadan Hazrat spent in Saharanpur. First full Ramadan he spent with Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh. And it was the same Ramadan, this first Ramadan. At the end of Ramadan, at the night of Eid, Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh, he sent someone to go and call Hazrat and Sufi Iqbal. He said that he sent someone, go and call both of them. When they both came into the room of Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh, Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh had 2 musallas. He gave 1 musalla to each, one to Hazrat and one to Sufi Iqbal Sahib, and he gave them, both of them, the khilafah. And he blessed them with ijazah. So in 1967, Hazrat received his khilafah. After Ramadan, then he came back to Medina Munawwara, and as he was living in Medina Munawwara those days, and he was in 1969, when Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh was also, he had also done his hijrah to Medina Munawwara. Once Hazrat was taking Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh to Masjid al-Nabawi. Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh was very weak, so he was not able to walk on his own. So 2 people would carry him from each side and take him to Masjid al-Nabawi. So once Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh from one side and some other person from the other side were carrying Hazrat Shaykh and taking him to the Masjid al-Nabawi. And there was a guard at the Masjid al-Nabawi who frequently used to see Hazrat helping Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh in bringing him to the masjid. So one day this guard said to Hazrat that Tadkhulul Jannah, that you will enter Jannah, because you're always, he would see Hazrat always doing service of his Shaykh to elderly person, bringing him to the masjid. So he said, Tadkhulul Jannah, you will enter Jannah. So Hazrat Shaykh, he did not hear properly, so he said that, he asked the other person that, what did that guard just say? And that person said to Hazrat Shaykh that he's saying to Hazrat Dr. Ismail that Tadkhulul Jannah, that he will enter Jannah. Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh then said, is there any doubt that Hazrat will enter Jannah? So Hazrat got glad tidings of Jannah by Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi Alayh. And this was in 1969. And so many different occasions where Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh gave amazing du'as to Hazrat. Because Hazrat was very close, very much attached. It was as if he was part of the family of Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullahi Alayh. Finally, in 1985, I'm going to move on very quick now. Time is not too much left. So, in 1985, Hazrat Rahmatullahi Alayh, he planned to do hijrah from Medina Munawwara and to come to North America. He applied for the visa, and the visa process took some time. So he left Medina and he was in England, UK. He spent about 6 months there, and over there are many of us, Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi's Khulafa, Mawlana Yusuf Mutala, and others, many others. So Hazrat was spending time in England with them, and 6 months he was in England, and then in the early 1986, around, I think March, April, somewhere around that time, early 1986, he came to Canada. And the first place he came to Canada, he came to Cornwall, which is near Montreal, Ottawa, Canada. And he stayed there in Cornwall for 2 years. And they established a madrasa there, and the madrasa is still running, alhamdulillah, in Cornwall. It's under the supervision of another Khalifa of Hazrat Shaykh Zakariya Rahmatullahi, Mawlana Mazhar Alam. In fact, Mawlana Mazhar Alam, he's the one who led Hazrat's Janaza in Chatham 2 weeks ago. So Mawlana Mazhar Alam, he is the one running, who's supervising, he's the principal of that madrasa in Cornwall. So this is where Hazrat first came and established that madrasa in Cornwall. 2 years later, in 1988, Hazrat, he moved to Waterloo. Waterloo is in Kitchener, near Cambridge, Toronto area, and he moved to that area from 1988 till 1990. 2 years he spent in Waterloo. In 1990, because they were searching, Hazrat's main goal of coming to North America was to establish a madrasa. There was no Islamic institute, there was no Islamic madrasa in North America at that time. So Hazrat left Medina Munawwara with this intention that he wants to go to North America to establish an institute, Islamic madrasa, where the students will become huffaz and ulama. So this was his main goal. So as he came to Canada, he went to Cornwall, he established one there. And 1988, when he came to Waterloo, he was looking for another place to start up another madrasa. But the properties were pretty expensive in Canada, and after a long search, nothing was coming in their range. So finally they were told, Hazrat was told, that there's cheaper properties in the US side. So they came, Hazrat and some others from the family, they came to a US side, they crossed the border, and they looked at different properties here, and they realized that the properties are cheaper in Buffalo. So alhamdulillah, after searching for different properties, they found a property in East Aurora, which is about half an hour from Buffalo. So they bought a building there, and another madrasa was established in 1991. So Hazrat lived in East Aurora from 1991 till 1993. In 1993, because that place in East Aurora was not big enough, it was small, it was good for starting. So alhamdulillah, the madrasa started up, but they were not allowed to keep more than 15 students in that place. So that place was not a long-term solution. So they were still looking for another place. In 1993, they found this property here, in this masjid that we're sitting in today. This was purchased in 1993. And at that time, this area of Buffalo, where we are here today, it was considered to be a very scary area. Literally speaking, it was considered a scary area, to the extent that I have heard that even police cars were not travel. If someone would call 911, they would not come in this area. So this is how scary it was. It was totally unsafe. A lot of crimes, a lot of murderers, and different shootings, and those types of things that people were not coming. Even till today, sometimes we talk to someone from other areas, from Amherst or somewhere, that you should come visit here. They still remember that picture of 30 years ago, and they still are scared to come to this area. But alhamdulillah, now it's different. But those who knew this, they are still scared to come to this area. Anyways, so they moved to this area in 1993, bought this masjid, bought the building next door, and few properties, established a madrasa here. That one in East Aurora, it got sold, and with that, they purchased this place. From 1993 till 2010. 27 years. Hazrat lived in this area, and his house was next door, and he made sure that in those days there was not a single Muslim family in this area. When this property was bought, now alhamdulillah we see not hundreds, I would say thousands of Muslim families in this area. And someone that comes today to see this area could not imagine that 30 years ago there was not a single Muslim. This change that happened this quick, if you tell someone that 30 years ago there was not a single Muslim there was not a single Muslim house, there was not a single masjid here, he will not believe you. Because now the situation is such that we have over 30, 40 masajid, and alhamdulillah, all of them are full. If we go for Jummah, all the masjids are full. And just 25, 30 years ago, there was not even a single Muslim here. So Hazrat came, he sacrificed everything and took the risk and moved here. In 2010, he did another hijrah to Canada, to Chatham, and established another madrasa there. And if you look at Hazrat's life now, we can realize that Hazrat's purpose, his main goal is establish madrasa wherever you go. Wherever he went, he established a madrasa. He went to Cornwall, he established a madrasa. He came to Buffalo, East Aurora, he established a madrasa. He came here, established a madrasa. He went to Canada, established another madrasa. Wherever he is going, he's making sure he establishes a madrasa there. And this is a sadaqah jariyah, inshallah, for Hazrat. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve all of these madaris till the day of Qiyamah, inshallah. Finally, the sad moment, 2 weeks ago on February 3rd, Friday morning around 9 a.m., Hazrat Rahmatullahi, Alayh, then he departed this dunya, and he left all of us in sorrow and in grief. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of Hazrat's services. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always keep these madaris, these masajid filled, and make it a sadaqah jariyah for Hazrat all the way till the day of Qiyamah, inshallah. Hazrat Rahmatullahi, during his lifetime, there are some unique things that we find. I'll just mention a few things, hopefully we can take these part of our life too. Number one, Hazrat Rahmatullahi, as we can learn from his life, his goal was wherever he's going, service for the ummah, service for the deen. And this should be all of our goals. This was the mission of Hazrat, that wherever he goes, making sure that he can establish an institute, a place for students and children to study. And in fact, as many of you might know, we, alhamdulillah, we're in the process of purchasing another property in Rochester to open up a madrasa there too. And I was doing mashwara with Hazrat that there's a demand in Rochester to open a madrasa there, and the people of Rochester were looking for something that their children can have a place for studying the deen and Quran. So Hazrat gave me an advice. He said that his words were that jitne ho sake madrasa kholo, open as many madaris as you can. There's nothing to ask in this. This was the mission of Hazrat, that always open. If you can, open up a madrasa, open up an institute for the children. This is the way of preserving the deen. Another important lesson that we learned from Hazrat's life, that he went through a lot of difficulties in his life. Different situations came in his life. Indiana. Yes, another institute that Hazrat opened was in Indiana, in Fort Wayne. Alhamdulillah, that is running also. And there's different places where Hazrat assigned someone that, you're there, open up a madrasa there. And it was all under the supervision of Hazrat. So another lesson that we can learn from Hazrat's life was that different people gave different trouble to Hazrat. Different situations came in his life where he was given hardships, where he was given trouble. But the lesson that we learned from Hazrat's life was never took revenge. He did not take revenge. In fact, he always himself would say good words about that person, and he would tell others that make sure that you are good to them too. Though those were his enemies, those who were hurting him, but throughout his life, while he was in Medina Munawwara, he had different situations he went through. Different people accused him of different things throughout his life. But he never wanted to take revenge. His lesson was to stay quiet. Do sabr, to stay quiet. And never even tell anyone what that person has done to you. Don't even complain. This was an amazing lesson that we find in the life, that he never complained, he never took revenge, he always stayed quiet and he did sabr. His words were always, Chup chap kaam karte raho. This was his words. Chup chap kaam karte raho. Quietly just do your work. Whatever you're doing, just stay busy. Don't worry about what others are doing. Another thing that we learned from Hazrat's life was, since I knew him for past over 30 years, I never seen him pray salah without jama'ah. Every salah was with jama'ah, with takbir ula. He never missed a rak'ah, and he never missed takbir ula. And this was his, I don't know for how many years. This is for at least 25, 30 years that I can witness. Allahu Alam, for how many more years, he had not missed a single salah with jama'ah. Every salah was with jama'ah, with takbir ula. Another thing that I seen in his life, for years and years, he never missed tahajjud. Even till the last day he passed away, he prayed his tahajjud. You know, we sometimes get lazy, we get sick, we are weak. Hazrat, during his end times, especially the last year or over a year, he was very weak. And when we used to ask him how you're feeling, he used to say, yeah, I'm weak. And it was so clear that he was not able to hear properly, he was not able to speak properly, he was not able to walk properly, and he was not able to stand, he was not even able to sit properly. He had to lay down most of the time. But he never missed his tahajjud. Every night, his whole life, he made sure that even when he was in Buffalo, I think it was 2 hours or more. I think it was 2 hours. I think it was even more than 2 hours. He used to come from his house, and in the room, in the front room, he used to come in there and he used to pray his tahajjud for 2 hours. And after he got weaker, the time got less, but he never missed his tahajjud. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to follow his footsteps, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to take these lessons and make it practical in our lives also. Wa akhiru da'wana.